Hello, and thanks for stopping by. Brightly lit and bustling 24 hours a day, Piccadilly Circus is one of London's great focal points, a major junction that's been the lively heart of the West End for well over a century. But how did it become such a landmark? What's this famous statue's real name? Hint, it isn't Eros. What lurks beneath the streets? And how did Piccadilly Circus almost become Piccadilly Square? Well, in this video, I'll be providing the answers to all of those questions, plus much more. It's said that if you hang around Piccadilly Circus for long enough, you'll eventually bump into someone you know. And to prove the point, this did indeed happen to me once. It's a busy place for sure, so it's rather incredible to think then that, in centuries past, this patch of land was pretty much countryside, with the only roads here being quite rural tracks. Things began to change in around 1612, when a fellow named Robert Baker purchased land near what's now Great Windmill Street. Baker was a tailor who'd made his fortune crafting and selling pickadilles, fancy lace collars which in the late 16th and early 17th centuries were the height of fashion. Once he'd bought the land, Baker built a collection of grand homes around here, none of which survive today, although the area is now occupied by Burlington House, which can trace its history back to the 1660s, and the Albany, which was built in the 1770s. As part of his property development, Baker also built a mansion for himself, which, in honour of the garment that had made him prosperous, came to be known as Piccadilly Hall, Piccadilly in this early instance being spelt with a K. At the time, the long road now known as Piccadilly was called Portugal Street, in honour of King Charles II's Portuguese Queen Consort, Catherine of Braganza. Although over time, thanks to Robert Baker's quaintly named home, Londoners began referring to the street as Piccadilly. Had they not, then I guess, in an alternative reality, this spot would be known as Portugal Circus. Piccadilly Circus first came into being in 1819. It was designed by the architect John Nash as part of his grand route from Regent's Park down through Portland Place and Regent Street towards Carlton House, the lavish home of the Prince Regent, later King George IV, who by all accounts was a greedy and deeply unpleasant man. Carlton House no longer exists. It was demolished in 1826 and replaced with Carlton House Terrace. Initially, John Nash, who's commemorated by this blue plaque on Great Russell Street, opposite the British Museum, intended the northern end of the boulevard to be topped by a huge grandiose circle called Regent Circus. This was never fully realised though, and so, having only been half built, it was rebranded Park Crescent. Despite this, the unbuilt Regent Circus still had an impact on the route's two main junctions. Oxford Circus was originally named Regent Circle North, whilst Piccadilly Circus was Regent Circle South. What we now know as Oxford Circus and Piccadilly Circus looked rather different back in John Nash's day. They were essentially basic crossroads, surrounded on all four sides by curved buildings, hence the circus name, circus being the Latin word for circle. Today, Cambridge Circus, a short distance northeast of Piccadilly Circus, probably gives the best idea as to how they once looked. The first references to Piccadilly Circus began to crop up in the 1830s. It would appear that, back then, the term was an informal one, for as this advertisement from 1882, and this map from 1886 both show, it was still officially referred to as Regent Circus for much of the 19th century. Being such an important junction, Piccadilly Circus soon became known for its heavy traffic, which was horse-drawn in those days of course. In 1851, when the Great Exhibition opened at Hyde Park for example, it was reported that cabs and carriages were backed all the way up to this spot. So bad was the traffic in fact, not only here but throughout the metropolis, Joseph Paxton, the fellow who designed the Great Exhibition's Crystal Palace, proposed building the Great Victorian Way, an elevated circular railway which would have included a branch into the West End terminating at Piccadilly Circus. This never came to fruition of course, although the idea went some way to inspiring the capital's Underground Railway. In those early days, one of the most notable buildings here was the White Bear Coaching Inn, which, having been established in the 17th century, predated the circus. It was here, in April 1764, that a young Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart spent his first night in London. The White Bear was demolished in around 1870 to make way for the current Criterion Theatre, whose auditorium lies entirely underground. Initially, this was a risky design, for in the late 19th century, the theatre was gaslit, sparking fears of toxic fumes, and so to counter this, fresh air was pumped into the venue. The original circular shape of Piccadilly Circus was destroyed in 1866, when a new road was ploughed into the area, that road being Shaftesbury Avenue. And with this breach came a new feature for Piccadilly Circus, the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain. Anthony Ashley Cooper, the 7th Earl of Shaftesbury, was one of the Victorian era's greatest men, a politician and philanthropist who did much to improve conditions related to child labour, housing, animal welfare and more. It was no surprise then that, when he passed away in October 1885, it was decided he should be honoured with a national memorial, one that, as was said at the time, should be erected on a conspicuous site on one of the most frequented public thoroughfares in London. Initially, Cambridge Circus was offered as the spot, although the committee in charge of the memorial favoured Piccadilly Circus. The task of creating the artwork was given to 32-year-old Alfred Gilbert, who, rather than making a straightforward statue of Lord Shaftesbury, thought a Greek mythical figure perched above a large fountain would be a more appropriate way of representing the Earl's life work. Although the figure who tops the fountain is generally referred to as Eros, this isn't Eros at all. It is in fact Eros' brother, Anteros, who in Greek mythology is both the god of requited love and the avenger of unrequited love. Maybe someone should tell Westminster City Council that they've got the wrong name on the memorial's commemorative plaque. The statue of Anteros is made from aluminium, the first public artwork in London to be so, and it was modelled on 15-year-old Angelo Colarossi, who lived on Masborough Road in Shepherd's Bush. The Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain was unveiled on the 23rd of June 1893, and although the public have since taken it to their hearts, Alfred Gilbert himself had a love-hate relationship with its creation. Despite being paid £3,000 for the work, it had cost him £7,000, roughly $779,000 in today's money, to create, meaning he was greatly out of pocket. Furthermore, Alfred wanted the fountains both to provide drinking water and to create a veil around Anteros. Although the council, keen to prevent splashing on the road, and thanks to the public bronze drinking cups being popular with thieves, scaled the water feature back, so much so that just a few months later, the Times reported that the memorial appeared dingy and decayed, as dry as autumn dust can make it. Despite this, a low flow of water was soon running from the fountain, and for many years, this helped make Piccadilly Circus's flower cellars a permanent fixture, the running water offering a handy way to keep their blooms fresh. Alfred Gilbert, meanwhile, claiming London had become cheerless, moved to Belgium, and later said the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain should be torn down and sold for scrap, with the proceeds going towards providing shelter for the homeless. He was much happier, however, with this exact copy of the fountain, which can be seen in Liverpool's Sefton Park, saying the way in which the jets of water were used here was far closer to his original vision. Over the years, Anteros has been removed from Piccadilly Circus several times, namely during the 1920s reconstruction of the current tube station, when he was temporarily placed in Embankment Gardens, World War II, when he was stashed away for safekeeping at Cooper's Hill in Surrey, and in the early 80s, when he was taken away for renovation. Today, it's impossible to imagine Piccadilly Circus without its giant illuminated advertising display, and very profitable it is too. Apparently, it costs £250,000 per week to run a campaign here. The first electrically lit billboards, known as sky signs, popped up around Piccadilly Circus in the 1890s, advertising a pharmacy and a cigar merchant. Just like today, they were restricted to the northern side of the circus, where the properties are privately owned. The other areas are owned by the Crown, who do not tolerate such gaudy nonsense. Initially, the authorities weren't too happy, and tried to restrict the signs, making it illegal for any to overhang the road. So in response, the owners simply turned them so they were flat against the buildings. By the 1920s, the advertising displays at Piccadilly Circus were fully established, with major companies such as Schweppes, Bovril, Guinness, and Gordon's Gin taking advantage of the lucrative site. There was also a crying baby advertising Nestlé's, as illustrated here, which I'm sure wasn't creepy at all. In World War II, the blackout meant of course that the lights had to be switched off altogether, and amidst the gloom, in early 1942, Piccadilly Circus became a favourite haunt of the serial killer Gordon Cummings, the so-called Blackout Ripper, which is a tale for another time. The longest permanent advertiser to feature at Piccadilly Circus is Coca-Cola, who've paid for a spot since 1954, and it was in 2017 that the current LED display was installed. Down below, meanwhile, is the Labyrinth Piccadilly Circus tube station. The tube first arrived here in March 1906, with the opening of the Baker Street and Waterloo Railway, aka the Bakerloo Line, followed in December that same year with the Piccadilly Line, then known as the Great Northern, Piccadilly and Brompton Railway. The original station had a red-tiled entrance above ground, similar to stations such as Covent Garden, Russell Square and Oxford Circus, which was designed by Leslie Green, the brilliant architect who died in 1908 at the tragically young age of 33. In its first year of operation, Piccadilly Circus handled 1.5 million passengers, but by 1922, that figure had risen to 18 million, meaning the station struggled to cope. Consequently, it was given a complete overhaul, with the ticket hall gaining space by being moved entirely below ground. No easy task, considering the work had to be carried out beneath one of the world's busiest junctions. To achieve this, a deep shaft was sunk, over which a fortified steel and concrete roof was placed, thus enabling traffic to continue passing overhead throughout construction. One access shaft, as shown in this photo from 1925, was sunk beneath the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain itself. The new station, designed by the Underground's other great architect, Charles Holden, was unveiled on the 10th of December 1928, and being so central, it was considered a real flagship for the tube. A shopping mall was incorporated around the ticket hall, and no expense was spared on the materials, with marble finishes, bronze picture frames, and fine columns all being used. There's also this wonderful, original world clock, which, if you listen closely, you can hear ticking. A mural entitled The Hub of Empire by the artist Stephen Bone was also installed above the escalators, but is now apparently lost. In 2016 though, a new installation was created in the ticket hall. This memorial to Frank Pick, the man who, in the 1920s and 30s, revolutionised London transport by commissioning leading architects and designers to create bold modern buildings and striking, colourful advertising. It was during Frank Pick's time that both the iconic Roundel logo and Harry Beck's masterful tube map were adopted. Sadly, Leslie Green's beautiful old building was demolished in the 1980s, a real travesty. Yet below, corridors from his original Piccadilly Circus station still lurk, sealed off and eerily deserted as countless people pass overhead. Although it may seem somewhat tame and corporate nowadays, Piccadilly Circus was, for many years, a dark, edgy, and often seedy place. A good illustration of this can be seen in the 1981 film An American Werewolf in London, which features the former Eros cinema. Should have been the Anteros cinema really, shouldn't it? Once located on the corner of Piccadilly Circus and Shaftesbury Avenue. Although this opened in 1934 as a newsreel theatre, it had, by the early 80s, become a grubby, pornographic cinema. It was here, towards the end of the film, that David Kessler transforms into a werewolf and proceeds to run riot across Piccadilly Circus. The sleazy atmosphere at Piccadilly Circus went back much further than this though. In 1862, the Russian novelist Dostoevsky visited London and was shocked by what he encountered here. At night, prostitutes crowd several streets in his quarter by the thousands, he said, adding, very disturbingly, that mothers could be seen bringing their young daughters into the business. During the First World War, the adult industry thrived around Piccadilly Circus, so much so that one newspaper reported a young officer attempting to walk across the junction was accosted no less than 16 times. By the 1920s, drug addiction, particularly heroin use, had also become associated with the area. All of this went towards making Vine Street Police Station, just around the corner from Piccadilly Circus, one of the busiest cop shops in the world, and is perhaps the main reason why this tiny street features on the London version of the Monopoly board. Amongst this chaos, Piccadilly Circus also provided something of a haven for the gay community, with the area's cafes, bars and hotels offering relatively safe places to meet, back in the days when homosexuality was deemed illegal. In the Second World War, the area also became known for Rainbow Corner, a huge club which opened at 23 Shaftesbury Avenue on the corner of Denman Street in November 1942.
Well, not exactly London. It's a bit of United States over in Piccadilly Circus.
Oh, where's that?
Rainbow Corner. Will you come?
Well, I'd have to.
Operated by the Red Cross for the use of American service personnel, Rainbow Corner was open 24 hours a day, offering showers, a barber shop, a restaurant and lounge area, Coca-Cola on tap, arcade machines, and in the basement, a coffee and donut shop known as Dunker's Den. The great band leader, Glenn Miller, broadcast from the club, and even General Eisenhower popped by for a visit. Rainbow Corner closed its doors on the 9th of January 1946, in a ceremony overseen by Eleanor Roosevelt. And sadly, the building which housed the club was demolished in the 1960s. For many years, ever since Shaftesbury Avenue and large buildings such as the Trocadero and the Criterion Theatre swept away John Nash's original circular design, there were numerous attempts to redevelop Piccadilly Circus, usually in the hope that some form of symmetry could be regained. In 1910, for example, in the wake of the death of King Edward VII, it was suggested the circus could be transformed into a square, King Edward VII Square, with a statue of the deceased monarch at the centre. Had this gone ahead, a National Opera House, along with a Shaftesbury Memorial Theatre, would have been built too. Another idea, from around the same time, proposed placing a roof over the entire junction, on top of which a shopping area could be built. In a similar way, a 1912 plan suggested building arches over each road as it entered the circus, along with elevated walkways accessed via escalators. Perhaps the most atrocious plans for redevelopment, though, were drawn up in the early 1960s by William Holford, which, in typical post-war style, would have seen the area turn into a forest of concrete tower blocks, with vehicles given priority below, and elevated, windswept pedestrian walkways crisscrossing the area. Can you imagine it? Thankfully, this dystopian idea was scrapped in 1972. And although Piccadilly Circus is far from perfect today, it is after all brash, noisy, and somewhat tacky. It's simply impossible to imagine London without it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at the history of Piccadilly Circus, and as always, I'd love to hear your own thoughts. Have you visited this famous landmark? If so, what did you make of it? And do you think any of the remodelling ideas suggested in the past would have been an improvement? Please be sure to let me know in the comments. If you haven't yet subscribed to Robslondon, then I'd appreciate it very much if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon to receive notifications, will ensure that you don't miss out on any future videos. Plus, of course, it'd be wonderful to have you along. And if you enjoyed this film, you can also give it a little boost by clicking the YouTube hype button below. If you're feeling extra generous, you can also support my work with a tip via either my Ko-fi account, which I'll link below, or the YouTube thanks button, which appears as a heart icon beneath the video. Any such financial donations are of course greatly appreciated, and they really do help go towards creating content. Anyway, on that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.